What if you wrestled with the divine and lived to tell the tale? In the dead of night, beside a lonely river, a man fought an opponent he could not see but could not release. His hip shattered under a supernatural touch, yet he clung on with ferocious determination. "Bless me, or I will not let you go." The mysterious stranger spoke words that would echo through eternity. "You shall no longer be called Jacob the deceiver, but Israel, for you have fought with God and with men, and you have overcome." This was no ordinary man. This was the father of a nation that would change the world forever. But prophecy had marked him even before birth. Two nations wrestled in his mother's womb. The older would serve the younger. A birthright would be traded for soup. A blessing would be stolen with lies. A ladder would connect earth to heaven. And after 20 years of exile, betrayal and transformation, one terrifying night would redefine everything. This is the story of Jacob, the man whose descendants would number like the stars, whose name would become synonymous with God's chosen people, and whose struggle reveals the mysterious ways God shapes human destiny. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as his wife. She was the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, and she came from Paddan Aram to become the wife of Abraham's son. Their marriage began with joy and promise, but as the years passed, a heavy shadow fell over their home. Rebekah could not have children. 20 years went by. 20 long years of waiting, hoping, and praying. Isaac watched his wife's pain grow with each passing season. He knew the promise God had made to his father Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Yet here he was, married for 2 decades without a single child. The promise seemed impossible. Isaac did what his father had taught him to do. He prayed. The book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 21, tells us that Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. This was not a casual prayer or a quick request. Isaac pleaded with God on behalf of Rebekah. He interceded for her, bringing her heartache before the Lord again and again. And God heard him. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah conceived. After 20 years of emptiness, life finally stirred within her womb. The long wait was over, but the struggle was just beginning. Rebekah's pregnancy was unlike anything she had expected. Something was terribly wrong. Inside her womb, there was a violent struggle. The children were pushing against each other, fighting even before birth. The pain and turmoil were so intense that Rebekah reached a point of desperation. Genesis chapter 25, verse 22 records her anguish. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. Rebekah could not understand what was happening to her body. After waiting so long for a child, now her pregnancy felt like a battle. She needed answers, and she knew where to find them. She went to inquire of the Lord. This was not a simple prayer. This was a deep seeking, a desperate cry for understanding. And God answered her directly. The Lord spoke to Rebekah with words that would shape the destiny of nations. In Genesis chapter 25, verses 23, the Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." This was an astonishing prophecy. Rebekah was not carrying just 2 babies. She was carrying 2 nations. These children would become the fathers of 2 different peoples, and they would be separated from each other. But the most shocking part of the prophecy was the reversal it announced. In the ancient world, the firstborn son held all the power, all the privilege, all the inheritance. The older son was everything. Yet God declared that the older would serve the younger. The natural order would be turned upside down. The secondborn would rise above the first. Rebekah carried this secret knowledge in her heart. She knew her sons' destinies before they even drew their first breath. When the time came for Rebekah to give birth, the prophecy began to unfold in a dramatic way. Genesis chapter 25, verse 24 says, "When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb." The struggle she had felt was the struggle between twins, two boys fighting for position even before entering the world. The first one came out red all over, like a hairy garment. They named him Esau, which means hairy. His appearance was striking and unusual, his entire body covered with red hair, giving him a wild and rugged look from the very beginning. But then something remarkable happened. Genesis chapter 25 verse 26 tells us, after this, his brother came out, with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. The second twin emerged, gripping his brother's heel, as if trying to pull him back, trying to take his place. It was as though the fight that had begun in the womb continued even at birth. They named the second son Jacob, which means he grasps the heel, or he deceives. It was a name that would prove prophetic, describing both his birth and his character. From his very first moment in the world, Jacob was reaching for what belonged to his brother. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to these boys. The long wait had produced not one son, but two, and these two would be as different as night and day. The boys grew up, and as they did, their differences became more and more obvious. They were twins, born moments apart, but they were nothing alike. Genesis chapter 25, verse 27 describes them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Esau was an outdoorsman, rugged and adventurous. He loved the wilderness, the thrill of the hunt, the freedom of the open fields. He was a man of action, strong and physical. He would go out for days tracking animals, returning with wild game slung over his shoulders. His life was exciting, filled with movement and danger. Jacob was completely different. He was quiet and thoughtful, preferring the safety and calm of home. While Esau roamed the countryside, Jacob stayed near the tents. He was a shepherd, a keeper of flocks, a man who enjoyed the peaceful routine of camp life. He was careful and calculating, always thinking, always planning. These differences affected their parents deeply. The same verse tells us Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. A painful division formed in the family. Isaac favored Esau because he enjoyed the meat that Esau brought from his hunts. There was something about his firstborn's strength and adventurous spirit that resonated with Isaac's heart. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Perhaps she remembered the prophecy that the older would serve the younger. Perhaps she saw something special in Jacob's quiet intensity. Or maybe she simply connected with him more because he stayed close to home. Whatever the reason, Rebekah's affection fell on her younger son. This favoritism would poison the family. The parents took sides, and the brothers grew up knowing that one was loved more by father, the other more by mother. The stage was set for conflict, jealousy, and betrayal. One day, an opportunity arose that would change everything. Jacob was at home cooking a stew. Genesis chapter 25 verse 29 says, "Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. Esau had been out hunting, and he returned exhausted and desperately hungry. The smell of Jacob's cooking filled the air. Esau's stomach growled. He looked at his brother's pot and felt the overwhelming need for food right now, immediately, without delay. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30 records his demand. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." His words were urgent, almost frantic. He did not even use his brother's name. He just demanded food. Jacob saw his moment. This was the chance he had been waiting for, perhaps without even knowing it. Here was Esau, the favored firstborn, the one who held all the rights and privileges of the eldest son, reduced to begging for a bowl of stew. And Jacob had something Esau wanted. Genesis chapter 25, verse 31, shows Jacob's calculated response. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." The birthright was everything. It meant a double portion of the inheritance. It meant the father's special blessing. It meant leadership of the family. It meant being the one through whom God's promise to Abraham would continue. And Jacob wanted it. Esau's answer revealed his character completely. Genesis chapter 25, verses 32 and 33 record his words. "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Esau was not actually dying. He was hungry, tired, and uncomfortable, but he was in no real danger. Yet in his mind, his immediate physical need was more important than his future inheritance. He could not see beyond the moment. He could not value what he could not eat right now, so he swore an oath, making a binding legal agreement to give away his birthright for a single meal. Jacob kept his side of the bargain. Genesis chapter 25, verse 34 tells us, "Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew." It was a simple meal, bread and lentil stew, nothing fancy, nothing special. This was what Esau's birthright was worth to him in that moment of hunger. The verse continues, "He ate and drank and then got up and left." Esau satisfied his hunger quickly, then walked away. There was no pause, no reflection, no second thoughts. He ate, he drank, and he left. The transaction was over as far as he was concerned. But the final words of this verse are devastating. They reveal the deeper truth about what had just happened. So Esau despised his birthright. This was not just a foolish decision made in a moment of weakness. This was contempt. Esau looked at his birthright, this sacred inheritance, this spiritual privilege, this connection to God's covenant with Abraham, and he treated it as worthless. He valued temporary satisfaction more than eternal blessing. He chose the immediate over the important. He traded the priceless for the cheap, and the Bible does not excuse this or soften it. Esau despised his birthright. He held it in contempt. He threw it away. The brothers now stood in a new relationship to each other. Jacob legally owned what had belonged to Esau. The younger had taken from the older, but the birthright was only part of the inheritance. There was still the father's blessing to consider, and that blessing could only be given once. Years passed, and Isaac grew old. His eyes grew weak until he could no longer see clearly. Genesis chapter 27 verse 1 tells us, "When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau his older son and said to him, 'My son.'" Isaac knew his time was coming to an end. He wanted to give his blessing to Esau before he died. In verse 2, Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death." He felt his mortality pressing on him. So he gave Esau specific instructions. In verses 3 and 4, "Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Isaac wanted one final meal of wild game, prepared the way he loved it. After that, he would pronounce the blessing that would pass on the covenant promises to his firstborn son. This blessing was not just a nice speech. It carried real spiritual and legal weight. It would determine who received God's promise and the leadership of the family. But Rebekah was listening. Genesis chapter 27 verse 5 says, "Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. She heard every word of Isaac's plan. And she remembered the prophecy God had given her before the twins were born. The older will serve the younger." She knew Jacob was supposed to receive the blessing, not Esau. As soon as Esau left to hunt, Rebekah acted quickly. She called Jacob and told him everything Isaac had said. Then she laid out her plan in verses 8 and 9. "Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it." Her strategy was clear. She would cook the meal herself using goats from their own flock. Jacob would bring it to Isaac and pretend to be Esau. Isaac's weak eyes would not be able to see the deception, and he would give the blessing to the wrong son. Jacob immediately saw a problem. In verse 11, he said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man while I have smooth skin." If Isaac touched him, he would know instantly that something was wrong. The plan would fail. Rebekah had already thought of this. She had an answer for everything. In verse 13, she said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." She was willing to take full responsibility for the deception. She told Jacob to trust her and obey. Jacob went and got the young goats, and Rebekah prepared the tasty food exactly the way Isaac liked it. But she did not stop there. Genesis chapter 27 verse 15 tells us, "Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob." Jacob now smelled like Esau, but there was still the problem of his smooth skin. Verse 16 shows Rebekah's solution. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. The hairy goat skins would feel like Esau's hairy arms and neck if Isaac reached out to touch him. Rebekah put the tasty food and the bread she had made into Jacob's hands, and he went to his father. Genesis chapter 27, verse 18 says, "He went to his father and said, 'My father.' 'Yes, my son,' Isaac answered. 'Who is it?' Isaac could not see, so he needed to know which son stood before him. Jacob spoke the lie directly. Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing.' Every word was false. He was not Esau. He was not the firstborn. He had not hunted any game. But he said it all with confidence, waiting to see if his father would believe him. Isaac was surprised. In verse 20, he asked, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "It seemed too fast for a hunting trip." Jacob gave another lie. "The Lord your God gave me success." He even brought God into his deception, claiming divine help for his trickery. But Isaac was not convinced. Something felt wrong. Verse 21 says, "Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not.'" Isaac's weak eyes could not help him, but perhaps his hands could tell him the truth. Jacob moved closer to his father. Genesis chapter 27, verse 22 tells us, "Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, 'The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau.'" Isaac's suspicion grew. The voice sounded like Jacob, but the hands felt hairy like Esau's hands. His senses were giving him contradictory information. Verse 23 says, "He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he proceeded to bless him." The disguise worked. Isaac's sense of touch won over his sense of hearing. He believed he was blessing Esau. But Isaac asked one more time to be certain. Verse 24 records his question. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Jacob lied again, directly and clearly. There was no hesitation, no hint of the truth. Isaac said in verse 25, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought the food, and Isaac ate. He also brought wine, and Isaac drank. Then in verse 26, Isaac made his final request, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." Jacob came close and kissed him. Genesis chapter 27, verse 27 tells us, "When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him." The smell of Esau's clothes completed the deception. Isaac was finally convinced. And then Isaac spoke the blessing. In verses 27 through 29, he said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." The words were spoken. The blessing was given. Jacob had obtained what God had promised would be his, but he had obtained it through lies, deception, and betrayal. The blessing could not be taken back, but the cost of how he got it would follow him for the rest of his life. Jacob had barely finished receiving the blessing when disaster struck. Genesis chapter 27 verse 30 tells us, "After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. And the timing could not have been worse. Esau returned with the wild game his father had requested, ready to receive his blessing. Esau prepared the tasty food and brought it to his father. In verse 31 he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." He stood there expecting his father's favor, completely unaware of what had just happened. Isaac was confused. Verse 32 records his question. His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." The words hit Isaac like a blow. If this was Esau, then who had he just blessed? Genesis chapter 27 verse 33 says, "Isaac trembled violently and said, 'Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed.'" Isaac's whole body shook as he realized what had happened. He had been deceived, tricked by his own son, but the blessing was spoken, and it could not be undone. When Esau heard his father's words, verse 34 tells us, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." The pain in his voice was raw and desperate. Everything had been stolen from him. His birthright was already gone, and now his blessing too. Isaac explained what happened in verse 35. "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." The word deceitfully cut deep. This was not a mistake or an accident. This was deliberate trickery, planned betrayal by his own twin brother. Esau's response showed he understood exactly who Jacob was. In verse 36 he said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." The name Jacob meant he deceives, and Esau felt the full weight of that meaning now. Jacob had lived up to his name twice over. Esau begged his father, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" But Isaac had given everything to Jacob. In verse 37, Isaac answered, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau would not give up. Verse 38 says, Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. Udu, a grown man, a warrior and hunter, stood crying in front of his father. The loss was too great to bear. Isaac did speak a blessing over Esau, but it was nothing like what Jacob received. In verses 39 and 40, Isaac said, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." It was more of a prophecy than a blessing. A hard life, living by violence, serving his brother. The hatred that filled Esau's heart after this was absolute. Genesis chapter 27 verse 41 reveals his thoughts. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Esau was planning murder. He would wait until Isaac died and the mourning period ended, and then he would take his revenge. Jacob's life was in immediate danger. Someone told Rebekah what Esau was planning. Genesis chapter 27 verse 42 says, "When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, 'Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you.'" She had heard Esau's threat, and she knew he meant every word. Rebekah gave Jacob urgent instructions in verse 43. "Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran." Jacob had to leave immediately. There was no time to waste. Esau's anger was too dangerous. She told him to stay with Laban until Esau's fury subsided, until his brother forgot what Jacob had done to him. But Rebekah did not tell Isaac the real reason Jacob needed to leave. Instead, she used a different excuse. In Genesis chapter 27 verse 46, she said to Isaac, "I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." She pointed to Esau's wives as the problem, suggesting that Jacob needed to find a wife from their own relatives instead. Isaac agreed with this reasoning. Genesis chapter 28 verses 1 and 2 tell us, "So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, 'Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother.'" Isaac sent Jacob away with instructions to find a wife among Rebekah's family. Before Jacob left, Isaac spoke another blessing over him. In verses 3 and 4, Isaac said, "May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." Isaac confirmed that the blessing of Abraham would continue through Jacob. Genesis chapter 28 verse 5 says, "Then Isaac sent Jacob on his way, and he went to Paddan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, who was the mother of Jacob and Esau." Jacob left his home, his family, and everything he knew. He was now a fugitive, running for his life from a brother who wanted him dead. Jacob traveled north toward Haran, walking alone through unfamiliar territory. Genesis chapter 28 verse 10 tells us, "Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He was heading to a place he had never been, to relatives he had never met, with nothing but what he could carry." Verse 11 says, "When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set." Jacob found himself in the middle of nowhere as darkness fell. He had no tent, no shelter, no comfortable bed. The verse continues, "Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He used a rock as a pillow and lay down on the hard ground under the open sky. But that night, something extraordinary happened." Verse 12 records, "He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it." In his sleep, Jacob saw a ladder or stairway that connected earth to heaven. Angels were moving up and down on it, traveling between the human world and the divine realm. This was not just a dream, this was a vision. And then Jacob saw something even more amazing. Genesis chapter 28 verse 13 says, "There above it stood the Lord, and he said, 'I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac.'" God himself appeared at the top of the ladder and spoke directly to Jacob. God made incredible promises to this fugitive deceiver. In verses 13 and 14, the Lord continued, "I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. God promised Jacob the same things he had promised Abraham and Isaac: land, countless descendants, and blessing for all nations. But God did not stop there. He gave Jacob a personal promise that must have touched his heart deeply. In verse 15, God said, "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Jacob was alone, afraid, and far from home, and God promised to be with him, to protect him, and to bring him back home safely. Genesis chapter 28, verse 16, tells us what happened when Jacob woke up. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." Jacob realized he had been sleeping on holy ground without knowing it. God had been present in that lonely place all along. Fear filled Jacob's heart. Verse 17 says, "He was afraid and said, 'How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven.'" Deuce. What Jacob had thought was just another empty spot in the wilderness was actually a sacred meeting point between earth and heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob wanted to mark this place as special. Genesis chapter 28, verse 18 says, "Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it." The rock that had been his pillow became a monument. By pouring oil on it, Jacob consecrated it, setting it apart as holy. He gave the place a new name. Verse 19 tells us he called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Bethel means house of God. From that day forward, this location would be remembered as the place where Jacob met God. Then Jacob made a vow. This was a serious promise, a commitment made in response to God's promises to him. Genesis chapter 28, verses 20 and 21 record his words, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God." Jacob was setting conditions, but they were based on what God had already promised. He wanted God to be with him, to protect him, to provide for his basic needs, and to bring him home safely. If God did these things, Jacob would fully commit to him. Jacob continued his vow in verse 22, "And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me I will give you a tenth." Jacob promised to make this place a permanent worship site, and he committed to giving God 10% of everything he received. This was a pledge of devotion and gratitude. With this vow made, Jacob was ready to continue his journey. God had met him in his loneliness and fear. God had spoken promises of presence, protection, and provision. Jacob was still a fugitive running from his brother's rage, but now he knew he was not running alone. Jacob continued on his journey until he reached the land of the eastern peoples. Genesis chapter 29, verse 2 describes what he found. There he saw a well in the open country, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. This was a community well, and there was a heavy stone covering its opening. Verse 3 explains the system. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. The shepherds worked together because the stone was too heavy for one person to move alone. Jacob approached the shepherds and asked them where they were from. They told him they were from Haran. Genesis chapter 29 verse 5 records Jacob's next question. "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" They answered, "Yes, we know him." Jacob had found the right place. His uncle lived nearby. Jacob asked if Laban was well, and they said he was. Then in verse 6 they said, "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." At that very moment, Laban's daughter was approaching the well with her father's flock. The timing was perfect. Jacob looked at the sheep lying around and suggested to the shepherds that they should water their flocks and move on, since it was still early in the day. But verse 8 tells us, "We can't until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." They had to wait for everyone to arrive before they could open the well. While Jacob was still talking with them, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep. Genesis chapter 29 verse 9 says, "She was a shepherd." This detail is important. Rachel was not just bringing sheep to be watered by someone else. She was the shepherd herself, responsible for her father's flock. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, something remarkable happened. Verse 10 tells us, "When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep." Jacob did alone what normally required multiple shepherds. The heavy stone that no one person could move, Jacob moved it by himself. This was a display of strength, perhaps driven by emotion at seeing his relative, or perhaps a desire to impress this young woman. After watering the sheep, Genesis chapter 29 verse 11 says, "Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud." He was overcome with emotion. After his long, lonely journey, he had finally found his family. Jacob told Rachel who he was, that he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son. Verse 12 says, "And she ran and told her father." Rachel hurried home to bring the news that a member of the family had arrived. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, his response seemed warm and enthusiastic. Genesis chapter 29 verse 13 tells us, "As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home." Laban welcomed Jacob with hugs and kisses, treating him like beloved family. Jacob told Laban all that had happened. The verse says Jacob told him all these things. We do not know exactly what Jacob shared, but Laban heard his story and responded in verse 14. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." Laban acknowledged their family connection. Jacob was not a stranger. He was blood relative, family. Jacob stayed with Laban, and time passed. Verse 14 says, "And Jacob stayed with him for a whole month." For 30 days, Jacob lived in Laban's household, presumably helping with work around the property. He was family, so he contributed to the household. After a month had passed, Laban brought up the question of payment. Genesis chapter 29 verse 15 records his words. Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." On the surface, this seemed fair and generous. Laban wanted to compensate Jacob properly for his work. But then the text gives us important information about Laban's family. Verse 16 says, "Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel." Laban had 2 daughters, and their names are listed in birth order. Leah first, then Rachel. The next verse describes them. Genesis chapter 29 verse 17 tells us, "Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful." The description contrasts the 2 sisters. Leah had some problem with her eyes. Perhaps they were dull or lacked sparkle. But Rachel was beautiful, both in face and body. She was striking to look at. The text immediately tells us Jacob's feelings. Verse 18 says, Jacob was in love with Rachel. His heart had chosen. From the moment he saw her at the well, Jacob had been drawn to Rachel. She was the one he wanted, so Jacob made his offer to Laban. In verse 18 he said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." This was an extraordinary bride price. 7 years of labor was a huge commitment, far more than the typical payment for a bride. But Jacob was willing to give this much for Rachel. Laban's answer seemed positive. Genesis chapter 29 verse 19 records his response. "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." Laban agreed to the arrangement. He said it was better for Rachel to marry Jacob than someone outside the family. The deal was made. But notice what Laban did not say. He did not explicitly promise, "I will give you Rachel after 7 years." He simply said it was better to give her to Jacob than to another man. The words were carefully chosen, leaving room for interpretation. Laban was already planning something, and Jacob, still riding the high of his love for Rachel, did not see the trap being set. Jacob went to work for Laban with Rachel as his goal. Genesis chapter 29 verse 20 tells us something beautiful about those years. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. 7 years is a long time, 84 months, more than 2,000 days. But to Jacob it felt short. His love for Rachel made the time fly by. Jacob worked hard during those years. He tended Laban's flocks, managed his herds, and increased his uncle's wealth. Every day brought him closer to marrying the woman he loved. Every sunrise meant one less day to wait. His love sustained him through the long years of labor. Finally, the 7 years were complete. Jacob had fulfilled his side of the agreement. He had worked faithfully, given Laban 7 years of his life, and now it was time to claim his bride. Genesis chapter 29 verse 21 records Jacob's words to Laban. "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." Jacob's request was direct and legitimate. The contract was fulfilled. He had earned the right to marry Rachel. Laban agreed to proceed with the wedding. Verse 22 says, "So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast." This was a proper wedding celebration. Laban gathered the community, prepared food and drink, and threw a party. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. The celebration continued into the evening. There was eating, drinking, and festivities. Jacob waited for the moment when he would finally be united with Rachel, the woman he had worked 7 years to marry. The day he had been dreaming about for so long had finally arrived. As the evening wore on and darkness fell, the time came for the bride to be brought to the groom. Genesis chapter 29 verse 23 tells us what happened. "But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. In the darkness, under cover of night, Laban substituted his older daughter Leah for Rachel. The verse emphasizes the deception. He took his daughter Leah. This was Laban's doing. He deliberately brought the wrong daughter to Jacob's tent. Whether Leah knew and agreed, or whether she was forced into this, the text does not tell us. But Laban was clearly the mastermind behind the switch. How did Jacob not realize what was happening? In that culture, brides were heavily veiled during wedding ceremonies and on the wedding night. The darkness of the tent, the coverings, perhaps the effects of wine from the celebration, all these factors combined to hide Leah's identity. Jacob believed he was with Rachel, and he consummated the marriage. Laban had also given Leah a servant. Verse 24 mentions, "And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant." This detail shows that Laban had fully committed to this deception. He provided Leah with her own maidservant, making her marriage to Jacob complete and official. Morning came, and the truth was revealed. Genesis chapter 29 verse 25 says, "When morning came, there was Leah." Can you imagine Jacob's shock? He woke up and saw Leah's face instead of Rachel's. 7 years of work, a wedding celebration, a consummated marriage, and it was with the wrong woman. Jacob confronted Laban immediately. The verse continues, "So Jacob said to Laban, 'What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?'" Jacob's anger and confusion pour out in his words. He had been tricked. The man who had deceived his own father and brother now understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end of deception. Laban had his excuse ready. In verse 26 he replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." He claimed this was about tradition and custom. The older daughter had to marry first. But if this was truly the custom, why had Laban not mentioned it 7 years earlier when Jacob asked for Rachel? Why had he let Jacob work all those years under false pretenses? The answer is clear. Laban had deceived Jacob deliberately. He had used Jacob's love for Rachel to get 7 years of free labor, and then he had tricked Jacob into marrying Leah instead. And now Laban had another proposal. Genesis chapter 29, verse 27, records Laban's offer. "Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work." Laban was not offering to fix his mistake. He was offering to compound it. Jacob could have Rachel too, but only if he agreed to work another 7 years. Jacob was trapped. He had already consummated his marriage with Leah. He could not undo that. But he still loved Rachel. So verse 28 tells us, "And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife." Jacob completed the 7-day wedding celebration with Leah and then immediately married Rachel as well. Laban gave Rachel her own servant too. Verse 29 says, "Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant." Now Jacob had 2 wives, 2 sisters, and the stage was set for years of family conflict. The final verse of this section reveals Jacob's heart. Genesis chapter 29 verse 30 says, "Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years." Jacob loved Rachel more. Everyone knew it. Leah knew it. Rachel knew it. And Jacob would spend another 7 years working for Laban, 14 years total for the woman he truly wanted to marry. Jacob worked for Laban for 14 years total, 7 years for each daughter. During this time, God blessed Jacob greatly. His flocks multiplied, his wealth increased, and his family grew. Genesis chapter 30 verse 25 tells us, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland." Joseph's birth marked a turning point for Jacob. He felt ready to return home. Jacob asked Laban to release him from his service. In verse 26 he said, "Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." Jacob had fulfilled every agreement. He had worked faithfully for 14 years. Now he wanted to take his family and leave. But Laban did not want Jacob to go. He had prospered greatly because of Jacob's presence. Genesis chapter 30, verses 27 and 28 record Laban's response. "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will pay them." Laban admitted that God had blessed him because of Jacob. Jacob agreed to stay longer, but he negotiated a new arrangement. He proposed a plan where he would take the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals from Laban's flocks as his wages. Laban agreed, thinking this would benefit him, but God caused Jacob's portion to multiply abundantly. Genesis chapter 30, verse 43 tells us the result. "In this way the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys." Jacob became very wealthy. His possessions increased dramatically. But this success created problems. Genesis chapter 31 verse 1 says, "Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, 'Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father.' Laban's sons became jealous and resentful. The atmosphere turned hostile. Verse 2 tells us, "And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been." Laban's face showed his changing feelings. The welcome and warmth were gone. Then God spoke directly to Jacob. Genesis chapter 31 verse 3 records the Lord's command. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." God told Jacob it was time to leave. Jacob made his decision. He would leave, but he would do it secretly. He called Rachel and Leah out to the fields where his flocks were. Genesis chapter 31 verses 4 and 5 tell us, "So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, 'I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me.'" Jacob explained the situation to his wives. Jacob reminded them how hard he had worked. In verses 6 and 7, he continued, "You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me." Laban had changed Jacob's wages repeatedly, but God protected Jacob through every manipulation. Jacob told them about a dream God had given him. In verses 11 and 12, he said, "The angel of God said to me in the dream, 'Jacob.' I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you.' Then God reminded Jacob of Bethel. Verse 13 records, 'I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land.' The time had come to fulfill the promise of return. Rachel and Leah supported Jacob's decision completely. Genesis chapter 31 verses 14 and 15 tell us their response. Then Rachel and Leah replied, "Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us." The sisters felt betrayed by their own father. They continued in verse 16, "Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you." Rachel and Leah gave Jacob their full blessing to leave. So Jacob put his plan into action. Genesis chapter 31 verse 17 says, "Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels." Verse 18 continues, "And he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan." The timing was strategic. Verse 19 tells us, "When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods." Laban was away from home, busy with sheep shearing. During his absence, Rachel took her father's household idols. Jacob left without saying goodbye. Genesis chapter 31 verse 20 says, "Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. He slipped away secretly, giving Laban no chance to stop him." Verse 21 summarizes, "So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead." Jacob was finally going home. 3 days passed before Laban discovered what had happened. Genesis chapter 31 verse 22 tells us, "On the 3rd day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled." By the time Laban learned the news, Jacob had a significant head start. Laban reacted immediately. Verse 23 says, "Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead." Laban gathered his men and chased after Jacob. For a full week they traveled, closing the distance. But God intervened before Laban could do anything. Genesis chapter 31, verse 24 records, "Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' God appeared to Laban in a dream and gave him a direct warning. The next day, Laban caught up with Jacob. Verse 25 tells us, "Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him." and Laban and his relatives camped there too. The two camps faced each other in the mountains. Laban spoke first, full of accusation. Genesis chapter 31 verse 26 records what he said. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war." Well, Laban accused Jacob of deception and of treating his daughters like prisoners. Laban continued in verse 27. "Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps?" He pretended he would have given Jacob a happy farewell. But then Laban revealed what was really in his heart. Verse 29 says, "I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.'" Laban admitted he had the strength to hurt Jacob, but God's warning held him back. Laban got to his real concern. In verse 30 he said, "But why did you steal my gods?" The household idols were missing, and Laban wanted them back. Jacob had no idea Rachel had taken them. Genesis chapter 31, verse 31 records Jacob's defense. Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force." Then Jacob made a dangerous statement. In verse 32 he said, "But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Jacob was so confident that he pronounced a death sentence on whoever stole the gods. Laban searched through Jacob's camp. Genesis chapter 31, verse 33 tells us, "So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. He searched systematically, checking each tent. Rachel had hidden them cleverly. Verse 34 says, "Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel sat on top of the saddle that contained the idols." Rachel gave an excuse. In verse 35 she said, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." This made her ritually unclean, so Laban would not ask her to move. The verse concludes, "So he searched but could not find the household gods. Now Jacob was angry." Genesis chapter 31 verse 36 tells us Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down?" Jacob felt deeply offended. Jacob continued in verse 37, "Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us." Then Jacob poured out 20 years of frustration. In verses 38 through 40 he said, "I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes." Jacob summarized in verse 41, "It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. Jacob gave God all the credit. In verse 42 he declared, "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." So Laban proposed a covenant. In verse 44 he said, "Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." They set up a memorial. Genesis chapter 31 verse 45 tells us, "So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar." Then in verse 46, he said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Genesis chapter 31 verse 52 records the agreement. "This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me." The stone pile marked a boundary. Neither man would cross it to harm the other. Early the next morning, Laban said goodbye. Genesis chapter 31 verse 55 tells us, "Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home." Jacob was finally free. Jacob continued toward Canaan. Genesis chapter 32 verse 1 says, "Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him." Angels appeared to Jacob as he returned. When Jacob saw them, verse 2 tells us, when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. Mahanaim means two camps. Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau. Genesis chapter 32 verse 3 says, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. 20 years had passed since Jacob had fled. Jacob gave his messengers careful instructions. In verses 4 and 5 he told them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." Jacob's message was humble. The messengers returned with terrifying news. Genesis chapter 32 verse 6 records, "When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Esau was bringing an army. Jacob's reaction was immediate. Verse 7 tells us, "In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well." Jacob panicked and split his camp in two. Jacob cried out to God. Genesis chapter 32 verses 9 through 12 record his prayer. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." Jacob prepared an enormous gift for Esau. Genesis chapter 32 verses 13 through 15 tell us, "He spent the night there, and from what he had with him he selected a gift for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. This was 550 animals total." Genesis chapter 32 verse 20 records Jacob's thought, "For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me." Jacob hoped the gifts would change Esau's heart. That night, Jacob moved his family across the river. Genesis chapter 32 verse 22 tells us, "That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. But then Jacob stayed behind alone." Verse 23 says, "After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions." Verse 24 reveals, "So Jacob was left alone. He remained by himself on the opposite bank. Then something incredible happened." The verse continues, "And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Out of nowhere, a man appeared and grabbed Jacob. They fought through the entire night. They wrestled for hours. Neither could overcome the other. Then Genesis chapter 32 verse 25 tells us, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. The stranger touched Jacob's hip, and with supernatural power he dislocated it. The pain was excruciating. Yet even crippled, Jacob would not release his grip. He continued to hold on with every bit of strength he had left. As dawn approached, the man spoke. Verse 26 records, "Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' The wrestler wanted to leave before sunrise, but Jacob refused. He said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.'" Through the night of struggle, Jacob had realized this was a divine encounter. Despite his pain and exhaustion, he refused to let go until he received a blessing. The man asked Jacob a question. Genesis chapter 32 verse 27 records, "The man asked him, 'What is your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered." This question was significant. Jacob had to identify himself, speaking the name that meant deceiver. Then came the pronouncement that changed everything. Verse 28 says, "Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and have overcome.'" And the stranger gave Jacob a new name, Israel, meaning he struggles with God. The stranger explained, "You have struggled with God and with humans, and have overcome." Jacob's whole life had been a struggle. He had struggled in the womb with his father, with Laban, and now he had struggled with God himself. Jacob wanted to know who he had been wrestling with. Genesis chapter 32 verse 29 tells us, Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. The man would not give his name, but he blessed Jacob. Jacob understood what had happened. Verse 30 records, "So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.'" Peniel means face of God. Jacob had wrestled with God himself and survived. Genesis chapter 32 verse 31 tells us, "The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip." As Jacob left that holy place, the sun came up. He was limping. The injury was permanent. For the rest of his life, Jacob would carry in his body a reminder of the night he wrestled with God and was transformed. Jacob looked up and saw his brother coming. Genesis chapter 33 verse 1 tells us, "Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men." The moment Jacob had been dreading had arrived. Jacob quickly organized his family. He put the servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then Jacob did something remarkable. Verse 3 says, "He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother." Despite his injured hip, Jacob limped ahead of everyone, bowing 7 times. But Esau's response was nothing like Jacob expected. Genesis chapter 33 verse 4 records, "But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. There was no anger, no violence. Esau ran to his brother, hugged him, kissed him, and cried. Both brothers wept together. Esau noticed Jacob's family. Verse 5 says, "Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. 'Who are these with you?' he asked. Jacob answered, 'They are the children God has graciously given your servant.' Esau asked about the herds. In verse 8 he said, 'What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?' Jacob explained, 'To find favor in your eyes, my lord.' The animals were meant to gain Esau's acceptance, but Esau refused the gift. Genesis chapter 33 verse 9 records, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Esau called Jacob my brother, a sign of true forgiveness. Jacob insisted. In verse 10 he said, "No, please. If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." Finally, Esau accepted the gift. The brothers parted peacefully, and Genesis chapter 33 verse 18 says, "After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan." God's promise had been fulfilled. Jacob had returned home. If this story touched your heart and helped you understand God's word better, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful Bible story. Share this video with your friends and family who need to hear about God's transforming power. Your support helps us continue bringing these timeless biblical narratives to life. Leave a comment below telling us what impacted you most about Jacob's story, and let us know which Bible character you'd like us to explore next. God bless you.